So my first meeting with Art was at National Championships, the Vancouver Colonnas, then subsequently known as the Chimos, but the Colonnas went to the National Championships, and I was there. And in line with that, I met all of the coaches, and Art was the coach of the Vancouver Colonnas. And as the top line team that they were, he was the coach. I met Art for the first time as coach of the Colonnas. So that's how I met him. And subsequently, he, I believe he was a director for BC at one point. Then in 1973, he was elected president of the Volleyball Association, CVA at that time, now Volleyball Canada. And essentially he was my boss from 1973 to 1978. I was very impressed with Art. He was a real straight shooter, very honest. He didn't pussyfoot around. He told things the way they were and what he wanted to achieve. He was an excellent president, an excellent person to work for, in my view. I would say the best president that I worked for over my 15 years with Canadian Volleyball Association. He would set out the objectives and then let you reach for them. And that was perhaps the best work environment I've ever been in terms of working for a particular person. And I'm sure he transferred those kinds of skills through to where he worked in the gas field. I thought that he was one of the best people in volleyball that I had met in terms of his honesty and his grasp of what the issues were and defining what we should do and how we should do it. So he was top-notch. I have not met another person that had the capabilities that Art had in that line. My best wishes to Art for being a wonderful volunteer for volleyball in Canada and having a significant impact on how the sport is played and how it's administered.
Good evening. I'd really wanted to be here tonight. Unfortunately, we had booked transportation for out of the country well in advance of being made aware of this wonderful honor. So I want to thank at this moment BC Volleyball, the nominating committee, and particularly Dormy for putting my name forth for this absolutely wonderful honor. And it's particularly relevant at this time because many of the inductees that are here today also I worked with for many years. Helen Hunt, for example, one of the most competitive volleyball players I have ever coached. She absolutely refused to accept the concept of defeat. You know, losing was just not part of her vocabulary. Then there's Ray Myrtle, whose dedication over the last 30 years to volleyball has been absolutely inspirational. He served as my assistant coach for several years. Patty Schlaffen, who I never coached, but I actually had many occasions to coach against her either as a player or a coach on the other side. Her dedication to this sport is unmatched. And then there's the 1971 Colonna's volleyball team. My goodness, that team became the backbone of Canada's national team for many years to come. In accepting this award, I want to accept it on the basis that everything I did was with my partner, my wife, June. She was with me every step of the way, and anything that I did or succeeded in this sport had her fingerprints all over it. So I'd like at this point in time to accept this award, not only for myself, but also on her behalf. Sadly, June passed away on February 4th, 12 years ago today, but she remains in the heart of her children, Tara and Jordan, who are with you here tonight. When I thought about what I would say tonight, there was just a torrent of memories came flooding out. There were battles won, some lost, roads traveled, friendships made. June and I moved out here in 1970, to the mecca of women's volleyball. And over the next several decades, we just poured ourselves into this sport. And if, with your permission, I guess, I'd just like to relate some stories from our period of time that we were so involved in volleyball. Let me start in 1971, the Pan American Games. Vic Lindell was the coach of the Pan American team. He was the most creative coach that I have ever met in my life, and his contribution to the advancement of volleyball in Canada is absolutely unparalleled. Well, Vic that year had the idea that we should videotape opposition teams to determine what their defensive patterns were, their hitting patterns, and so on. Now, it doesn't seem that revolutionary today, but at that time we were the first team in the entire world to try videoing. And now everybody could grab a cell phone. It'd be easy to video a team. Let me tell you about the video equipment in 1971. With the cameras, the battery pack, the monitor. It all fit into a great big wooden trunk that weighed about 45 pounds. I think my greatest contribution to the Pan American Games in 1971, which were held, by the way, in Cali, Colombia, was lugging that video equipment around. Now, I don't know if our video equipment really helped, but we were becoming competitive. In the 1967 Pan Ams, the national team had not won a single match, not even a single game. And in Cali, Colombia that year, we finished fifth. And the big feature of that particular event was we beat the United States for the first time in an international volleyball. Now, if I come back to Canada, 1973, Canadian Championships were being held in Quebec. And the club team here had been changed from Colonna's to the name to Chimo of BC. We were in the finals of the championships in Quebec City, and the referee was going to be Gilles Fortin, who was an emergency room doctor from Montreal. He was a great referee. In fact, he was the first referee that the International Federation certified as an international referee from Canada, and he was due to referee the match. And in those days, you couldn't coach from the sidelines, and if you did, you were warned or tossed out of the gym. Well, I had a history of doing a little bit of that coaching from the sideline. I'd been warned a number of times, but never been tossed. And just before the match started, this was the final match, Gilles walked over to me, and he looked like he had a purpose in his mind. And he said, "Art, I'm giving you the first warning for coaching. And if you coach one more time from the bench, you're in the stands." I was aghast. I said, "Jill, how can you give me a warning? The game hasn't even started. It's not right." He looked at me with these calm emergency doctor eyes and said, "Art, I just did. Good luck with the match." Now 1973 was an incredibly busy year on the international front. First of all, we had a terrific tour of China with the national team. It was a wonderful event, 3 weeks of competition, 3 weeks of cultural exchanges. The first match was played in Beijing, which in those days was still called Peking. 20,000 people in the stand. It was frightening as hell. We'd never played before 300 people in our life. The matches went well, the cultural exchange was beautiful, but I look back in hindsight and I think, my God, what was our fashion sense in those days? 1973, if you remember, was the year of miniskirts in North America. And our traveling uniform had this lovely red blazer and a very short miniskirt. And that was our traveling outfit. China at the time was being ruled still by Mao Zedong. And everybody over the age of 7 had choice of 2 different outfits they could wear. One was a drab blue Mao jacket with blue slacks, or a drab gray jacket with gray slacks. I can just imagine how horrified they must have been when these tall, beautiful women in miniskirts walked off the plane. But they treated us wonderfully. It was just a tremendous tour. And I remember one last incident. We were at a commune, and which is really just a great big farm with about 500 or 600 people living there communally. And it was a lovely May afternoon, and we were sitting on hay bales and being entertained by some children from the commune. They were singing and dancing for us. And they were asked if we could sing a Canadian song for them. Well, Carol Bishop, who was our resident maestro, had a guitar. She often traveled with a guitar. And so she said, sure, we would. So we blasted out this robust rendition of a very un-Canadian song called Okie from Muskogee. My God, I don't know what possessed us. And for those youngsters in the crowd tonight, if you don't know what Okie and Muskogee song is all about, just go on one of your streaming services and you'll find out. Later that year, we traveled to the World Championships in Cali, Colombia. And this was a time to compete against the top players and teams in the world. And this trip was filled with drama, and it started early, right off the bat. We arrived at the airport ready to get on the plane, and one of our players, who I won't mention, had forgot her passport. She couldn't get on the plane. We left without her. It took her 2.5 days to get down to Colombia to join us. And in the meantime, we traveled for approximately 28 hours from Vancouver to get to Montevideo. When we arrived, no luggage. All the team had was their blazers, their mini skirts, and their toiletries in a small bag. We had no idea when our uniforms would arrive. Well, as a matter of fact, a year ago at the time, if you weren't into soccer, it was almost impossible to get any sporting equipment. In particular, you couldn't get women's sporting equipment. So we ended up buying boys' playground sneakers, some boys' shorts, soccer shorts and T-shirts, and we practiced in those for 3 days before our uniforms arrived. Well, the one redeeming feature of that is we made the headlines and the picture in the local sports pages. We did pretty well that year. We finished 7th, which was, in our view, a good progression for our team, especially competing against the top players in the world. But the drama wasn't over yet. It was a Saturday night, and the finals were going to be the next day at 3 o'clock in the afternoon. It was going to feature Japan versus Russia. And I remember our hotel was right on the central square in Montevideo. And in the middle of the night, I was awoken. There was all kinds of noise. It sounded like vehicular noise outside our hotel room. I looked out the window, and my God, the square was filled with armored vehicles and troops in full battle gear. There had been a military coup in Uruguay that night. Fortunately, it was a bloodless coup. There were no shots fired. In any event, it was rather spooky. The next day, when the championships were being held, there was approximately 12,000 people in the stadium, and a military honor guard walked in along with a military band to play the national anthem. And there were 12,000 people in the stand hissing and whistling their rage at these military people in their midst. And then they played the national anthem, and the Uruguayans in there, they clenched their fists, I recalled, and sang with massive passion. You could tell the rage in their voices. It was all very frightening. It was also very thrilling. I could have 1,000 stories, but it's time to move on. I just want to again thank BC Volleyball for this tremendous honor, and I also want to take the opportunity to thank every player, every coach, every manager, everyone else who involved in volleyball during the time June and I were involved, for the wonderful, precious time they gave us. We'll never forget it. Thank you.